All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are now joined by our patriotic lawyer and barrister, Stephen Barrett, who's now at this point, I think you're the channel's barrister. So welcome back to the show, Stephen. How are you?
I'm very well. That's very kind. I don't think I can be described as a patriot because I think that's a political position, and I
I
like
don't
to
think
not
so.
do.
I
That's
think
all
it
right.
has.
I'll give you.
So okay, fine. An unpatriotic lawyer. um, so we have the report out finally of from the privileges committee, and there's been so much drama around. There's politics around there, but there have been lawyers trying to analyze it or see it from the legal perspective. So in this video, in this interview, I want to ask you about your perspective on the report, whether do you think that this privileged committee, because the way they're portraying it in the media, that it's like a legal court, whether it is a legal court, obviously it's a rhetorical question. And also, we are now hearing that the people in charge of it are going to be sanctioning and punishing certain people, MPs, if they call it a kangaroo court. So first things first, what do you think of this whole saga?
Well, 9 months ago, probably the most respected barrister in the land, who beat Boris in the prorogation case, which caused Boris a huge amount of embarrassment and political difficulty and all of the rest of it, who is in the House of Lords, who is a highly, highly respected non-partisan figure, wrote to the committee and advised them that they were messing up.
Hmm.
And they were. And they decided to ignore him. And 9 months later, it has turned out that ignoring the advice of Lord Panic is perhaps not the wisest thing to do.
All right.
And they've managed to get themselves into a total mess. Law is very technical and precise. And we should have noticed early on that a great switcheroo was happening, a lot of jazz hands. So when they debated the motion, they said that it would need to knowingly mislead.
Yeah.
And that's what's in Parliament's rule. That's what's in Erskine May. That's what everybody expects to do. Because if you lie to somebody, you knowingly mislead them. If you ask me the way to the supermarket and I don't know the way to the supermarket or get it wrong, I'm not lying to you if I sadly send you in the wrong direction. I would have genuinely been trying to direct you towards the supermarket, but being me, and I'm particularly bad at directions, I got it wrong, and I'm terribly sorry. But you can't hold me up and call me a liar just because I made a mistake. And that's a basic foundational principle of law. I mean, that really shouldn't be
Yeah.
contestable. But they decided to ignore that. And they decided that they'd go ahead with recklessly misled, whatever that means. Oh, and
Yeah.
apparently they're going to define it. Now, when I talk about all these things, the power to define what something is in law is everything. That's God power. So you either follow the rule of law, which means you use the existing definition, or you sort of assume this God power. And it's very interesting. Recently, an AI, these AI programs. Well, a lawyer in America got this AI bot to write his submissions to the court. And the AI bot stumbled across this truth, what the parliamentary committee has stumbled across, that if you just rewrite all the law, then you win the case. So the AI bot went around just inventing fake cases.
Oh my God.
And it cited from them, so it quoted from these fake cases.
Yeah.
And the attorney who did this was like, "Oh, this is great. We're definitely going to win." And he put it into the court, and the judge went, "Yeah, these are not cases.
They don't exist.
I know they support your case, but this isn't the law."
Wow.
And really, because there's no judge in the case of this parliamentary committee, because they are basically feral, they have gone into a lawless place. They've put the rule of law aside. They've put the rule of consistent application of rules aside. They've done another switcheroo, which is that they're only supposed to look at the legality. So that means whether or not, when Boris said that the rules were followed, were the rules followed? Now, that was always going to be an uphill challenge for them because the Metropolitan Police investigated that and said he's not a serial rule breaker. So rather than face any of these challenges, it's very difficult for them to prove knowingly mislead. So rather than face the challenge, they do jazz hands and they change the word.
They've gone with their feelings and instinct and essentially their biases.
Oh, I think that's very true, Maya, when you say it's all about feelings.
Yeah,
Because
how they feel. Yeah.
yes. And when you leave reason and the consistent application of rules, which is what law is, what I do, and you move into emotion, that is the antithesis of the rule of law. It's the opposite of what justice is supposed to be. And it doesn't end well when humans do this. I mean, there is nothing new under the sun. Humans have done all of these things before. And when they start doing this, it doesn't go well.
So just a quick thing. Obviously, we're now clarified it was not a legal court. And obviously, there's a parliamentary procedure is also basically made up, as in the House creates procedures, there's a speaker, the House authorities. If we were to have something like this to happen for a member of parliament, I'm guessing the most logical thing to do is that the Speaker of the House of Commons has a team and alongside the authorities, House authorities. So technically speaking, if you have to do something like this, any sort of investigation into a member misleading knowingly or accidentally should be the job of the Speaker's office, right? Because the Speaker is the referee of the chamber, not really the other MPs, the colleagues of that MP to make up their own court, right?
Well, I mean, the Speaker is ultimately responsible for this. Parliament is ultimately responsible through its own reputation. But the Constitution allows them to do this. And then the promise that they've sort of always made back is that they will apply their rules in a consistent way. And this committee is unique in that it isn't doing that. Normally, they do apply their rules in a consistent way. And there's usually a declaration that they're doing it. I mean, this committee contains a declaration that's doing it. That's why they're reacting with sort of emotion and punishment to how dare anybody say that we're not doing it. But if you analyze what they're doing, they're not doing it. And that's really important. It puts me in a total, like when you call me a patriot.
Yeah.
See at the beginning, and then immediately I said, "Well, look, I want to be politically neutral." So you said you're an anti-patriot.
Yeah, exactly. That's how.
I just want to be neutral, and what the committee is doing to me is saying we are completely respectable, and we are following the rule of law. And you go through it, and you go, "Well, you aren't." It's like, "Well, you're saying that we're completely unrespectable."
Perfect example.
I'm saying that you're not following the rule of law. If you think that is respectable or not is your personal political opinion. What I am doing is analysing fact.
Right.
And they see, fact and truth and objectivity, that is what law is.
Yeah.
And if they don't want to have to deal with that, if they don't want to have to act in a rational way, then they could stop pretending to be lawyers. We've some other barristers have weighed in now, and I'm always grateful for numerical support. I've often found myself in public life sort of on my own at the beginning, but I had a tendency to be kindly treated later on. And another KC has weighed in over the weekend, and he adopts a really nice phrase, which is a quasi-judicial process. So because the Constitution means that they can't be held to account by a court, they've always gone, we can do whatever we like. Well, that's technically true. You have promised that you will be a quasi-judicial process. You have undertaken that you will apply the rule of law. And it's really important then that we hold them to that standard. And I'm not even criticizing the committee, because such is my commitment to political neutrality that I will tell you that you can have show trials if you want to. You could have, if everybody in Britain...
But you have to be clear about it. The difference is in that and a legal court. So when we say kangaroo court, it's not as an insult. Obviously, some people will use it as an insult. We're using it to clarify that it's not an actual court.
Yes, exactly. I mean, the majority of human beings alive today do not live in democracy. So they don't live in states where there is the rule of law. So it's actually quite common for humans to not live in states governed by the rule of law. And in fact, throughout antiquity, throughout history, we've had tyrants before. We've only been rule of law since about 1689, which ironically is when the Bill of Rights was written that allows them to do this. But that's how long, until the Parliamentary Committee on Privileges in 2023, the history books will write, the United Kingdom was a rule of law state.
But okay, so on that front, the committee are now exercising, again, new made-up powers, I'm guessing, because some MPs, members of the Privy Council, have been criticising and calling him kangaroo court. It's their opinion, I guess. And they want to now sanction and punish people for using words. What do you think of that?
Well, I mean, I think this is all clearly tied up in emotion because we're getting leaks even now. I mean, the latest leak to a journalist is that there's going to be some sort of expose of a conspiracy to point out that they're not following the rule of law. Well, good luck if they try and tie me up in some sort of
Yeah.
conspiracy. Or this KC who weighed in over the weekend, who I actually had never spoken to before yesterday. So good luck to saying that we're involved in some sort of
coup.
yeah. The reason we're saying you're not following the rule of law is because it's visible. It's totally visible.
Yeah.
And you can tell how silly it was to begin with. They started out by targeting the privy councillors.
Yeah.
Well, so when we used to have tyrants, and we used to not have the rule of law, and we gradually sort of created it in this country. And as we clawed it back, we took away powers from our tyrant, which was the king. And that the king was a tyrant. You go back to William the Conqueror, the man's a total tyrant. Doing anything he doesn't like will get you killed. There's no laws, no consistency. You just have to please the king. You know, I went on a holiday, a stag party to Wales. And we stayed in a castle, and there was an oubliette. So in the 12th century, if the Lord of the Manor didn't like you, or you'd done anything that irritated him, or he just fancied throwing you in the oubliette, he threw you in the oubliette, and you didn't come out. Eventually, we started to think, hang on a second, shouldn't we have some rules about who goes in the
Stop throwing random people in.
and who doesn't? And that's what we mean by creating the rule of law, the rule of the consistent application of rules. And we took all these powers away from the king. Now, one of the very few things we've left the king, so before we could totally emasculate these monarchs, is we left him his privy council. It is His Majesty's most noble privy council. It is to advise him, and it's for him to discipline his privy councillors. It is not for Parliament or for Harriet Harman
to discipline
to start telling off his privy councillors. So that, again, is just a massive constitutional blunder. Why even do that? They didn't have to. They could have said, we'll discipline all MPs. And if they disciplined all MPs, you'd be like, well, a parliamentary committee might be the proper place to discipline all MPs. But to single out the privy councillors, that's just constitutionally inept. Okay, and I'm not involved. I haven't talked to anybody else about the fact that that is constitutionally inept. I'm not involved in some sort of conspiracy to point out that they keep making mistake after mistake after mistake. But this is another mistake. Well done, committee. This is embarrassing now. If we're a court, and we have the best judges in the world, the absolute best in the world, and the world comes here to use our judges because they are the best in the world. But I would not say that our judges are perfect. And we've had embarrassing situations where a judge has behaved in
Brexit days.
Well, arguably with Aaron Banks, that wasn't terribly edifying for the judiciary to have somebody say, yes, you lied, but it didn't cause any loss. Ooh, nice that the Court of Appeal then came along and said, no, forget that happened. This is the rule of law again. And the Court of Appeal restores the rule of law, restores respectability. There is no appellate process. There's nobody there to come along to this committee. I mean, in theory, I think you're constitutionally right. In theory, I think the Speaker could step in and say, the Speaker of the House thanks the Parliament Committee on Privileges for its kind work, which we will completely ignore. I mean, it's actually very clever from Rishi and the government. I think they suggested that the Conservative MPs just might note it. Let's all come along and go, we note that this occurred.
Yeah.
And then moving on.
It's like an advisory referendum. Yeah, thank you for your vote.
It's a way to get over the issue. But I can tell you right now that it is no way to solve the rule of law issue to start going around threatening everybody.
No.
I mean, how bad does that look? Because that's, we're going to have a show trial, right? Anybody who says it's a show trial, we're going to, what are you going to do? We'll punish them. Okay, this is getting very much sort of if they float, they're a witch, and if they drown, they were innocent. I mean,
politics aside, in terms of the political leanings of MPs, it seems like when it comes to these sort of situations and the chaos we've had in the House for the past few years, the quality or lack of quality of our politicians, it makes you compare it to like even recent years, as in a few decades ago when the old establishment, the politicians that we had, you might look back and be like, well, I didn't really agree with their vision or their policies, but the old establishment, they were mostly professional, successful lawyers who then became MPs. So in terms of the constitution and the way House worked, it was more stable because they knew what they were doing, right? Even though if they were out of touch, but at least the House was more respected and had some credibility compared to these guys. They're the current class of MPs.
Well, it's really interesting. They basically stopped reading law, and I can tell. And so they didn't think that they had to, and I can tell you exactly why that happened. It's because the EU is writing it all for them and then giving it to them and telling them that they have to implement it whether they like it or not.
Yeah.
At which point you do stop reading the law. You don't need to read the law. All you need to do is to go in the media, be charming, get the people to like you, kiss babies, and get voted in, and that becomes your job. And a lot of them, I suspect, do think that this is still their job. I mean, is it interesting that when Parliament opened up, and don't quote me, but I think it's somewhere in the 1920s. It might have been earlier. It might be when we got full emancipation. One of the major complaints about Labour, when Labour was created, a lot of the sort of then Conservative MPs were like, oh, they're illiterate. They won't be able to read the law. They won't be competent at the job. And what those, I mean, that's pretty rude. So and it's a political position because it's an emotional position, but I'm sort of have a bit of sympathy with those Labour MPs, if I'm completely honest. But what they did was they set about teaching themselves to read and teaching themselves how to read law. And very quickly they got up to speed with it. And when you do that, when you make them read the law, they become much more able, much more functionally, and constitutionally able, much less likely to receive detailed advice from Lord Panic and go, yeah, I don't think I need to follow that. They're much less likely to do that. The dangers of what happens go aside. But we are certainly in a position, I think it would be a political position for me to talk about certainly any individual MP or to say anything about the quality. But I think as a matter of fact, they have stopped reading law.
But as you said, it's one problem, and we have talked about this, you and I, before privately, is the membership of the European Union constitutionally made our politicians or the political system slightly lazy because they didn't have to do things. They weren't really under pressure, on the spotlight. And now that we've left the EU, it's kind of been exposed now, right?
Well, I mean, once you're in the EU, they do all the heavy lifting on politics for you. And that's a neutral phase because, again, I'm not taking a position on the EU. And by the way, I mean, that's, again, the Brexit referendum was a bit like this committee. It was hysterical. You weren't allowed to say things. I had to block, I'm going to say, maybe I won't do any identifying features, but an individual on Twitter because I was explaining something about the EU and EU law. Which they thought reflected negatively on the EU. I mean, I've also written things which reflect positively on the EU. My first ever article was "We must defend the EU." So I'm actually.
But you were being objective,
I'm objective. But this individual was so emotional about the idea that what I had written was so embarrassing for the EU that I mustn't say it. And he kept saying to me, "Oh, you're being political. You're being political." It's like, well, so the only way I can not be political is to endorse the EU. No, that's just gibberish. I mean, that's completely gibberish. I would become a politician if I endorsed the EU or decried it. So I do neither. I simply explain what's going on. And that was, the Brexit debate. We weren't allowed to say things which were perfectly true. And now the committee says we're not allowed to say things which are perfectly true. This has got a long sort of established history, but it's constitutionally embarrassing because it's not dealing with law in a proper or grown-up way. And it's very hard for my profession because when I say, a Casey weighed in at the weekend, it's very hard for us to sort of step in. We don't want to because we remember the old division between law and politics, and we ought to stay out of things. One of the criticisms that I can feel levied at me, which I sort of have a bit of sympathy with, is that I probably shouldn't be talking to you, and I probably shouldn't be writing articles, and I probably shouldn't be going on the telly this afternoon.
Don't have any views.
But at the end of the day, if I don't, then how on earth are the public going to know any law?
That's true. That's a good point. Yeah.
And if everybody's running around in law being silly and using it for gain,
who's going to protect it? Yeah. That's the problem. Yeah, it's a very thin line, I guess. And you always try to be professional in terms of not getting political about it. But as you said, it is quite difficult. Some people would say even this is too far. But if you don't talk about it, if none of your colleagues talk about it, then who does? So that's the problem. Anyway, thank you so much, Stephen Barrett, for coming on the show. And hopefully we'll have some sanity at some point. Let's go. Let's go back to the show, guys.